All right, so it's actually now 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So depending where you are, it may not be 3 p.m. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's conversation. So we now have different panelists that's going to be here to talk about collaboration, because I know a lot of you have been thinking about it, or maybe are curious, or already doing collaboration with different organizations, or want to connect with new audiences or with their existing audiences. So you're definitely at the right location. So what I will do is I actually will talk to you a little bit more about our series, and then I will talk a little bit more about our panelists, and then we'll start the conversation. So the series itself, the Designing Culturally Inclusive Programming, focuses on strengthening nonprofit infrastructure and facilitating deep engagement on key topics so that organization can achieve lasting change. So throughout this series, we will bring practitioners and scholars to help us engage with different themes: positionality, collaboration, inclusivity, power, decolonization, and programming. So this series is part of the National Endowment for the Humanities Special Initiative, A More Perfect Union, which is designed to demonstrate and enhance the critical role the humanities play in our nation, while also supporting projects that will help Americans commemorate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence in 2026. So the series itself is actually organized by Maryland Humanities. So I know some of you may already be familiar with Maryland Humanities, and some of you may not. That might be the first time hearing about Maryland Humanities. So Maryland Humanities is here to create and support bold experiences that explore and elevate our shared stories to connect people, enhance lives, and enrich communities. So today's conversation is going to be moderated by and facilitated by me, but we also have with us different people that have been contributed their labor, especially the Maryland Humanities staff. But we also have with us today Ashantis Gardner, who's actually will be capturing the conversation. So at the end, we'll have a snapshot, a graphic snapshot of today's conversation. So in terms of our panelists, we actually have 3 people who are with us today and that I'm excited to be in conversation with. So the first person that we have is Basma Alawee. She is the National Campaign Director for We Are All America. She oversees organizing efforts across 21 states for We Are All America, which is dedicated to promoting policy that support refugee and immigrant communities. In 2019, she founded WeaveTale, to which she helped share the stories of over 300 refugees and immigrants and develop programming to train individuals to share their stories through public speaking. Basma's work bridges the gap between refugee and immigrant communities to build understanding and unite efforts. Her lived experiences as a former refugee from Iraq fuels her passion and dedication in advocating for refugee and immigrant rights in the US and abroad. So we actually will add more about Basma's bio to our chat. The next person we will be in conversation with is Ollie Clarkson. So she was born and raised on the east side of Michigan. Ollie Clarkson came to Grand Rapids to attend Cornerstone University, earning her Bachelor of Arts in Linguistics and Spanish. Ollie has spent over 6 years at the Hispanic Center of Western Michigan, where she has led team of staff and contracted under language services and workforce development. In all her work, she leads with a mindset of developing young professionals for current and future success, not only for the organization, but for the individual as well. Ollie also focuses on the importance of language accessibility and building strong relationships with businesses and organizations throughout Michigan to position the Hispanic community to better access opportunities and path for success. And then we have with us Deborah Schwartz. She's an independent consultant focused on good governance, education, community partnerships, and mission-driven planning. She also teaches in the Johns Hopkins University Museum Studies program. From 2006 to 2020, Mrs. Schwartz was president of Brooklyn Historical Society, BHS, a 150-year-old urban history center. There, she worked with numerous partner organizations, including the Brooklyn Navy Yard, Wiggsville Heritage Center, and the Empire Store Corporation. In 2020, Mrs. Schwartz successfully led the efforts to merge BHS with the Brooklyn Public Library. She was Deputy Director for Education at the Museum of Modern Art from 2002 to 2006. And in 2001, she created the critically acclaimed exhibition, Art Inside Out, for the Children's Museum of Manhattan. Schwartz was the Vice Director for Education and Program Development at the Brooklyn Museum from 1983 to 2000. She has authored numerous articles about community building in museums. So welcome, everyone, and welcome to today's conversation. So to get started, I wanted, because I know like there are different people in today that have joined today's conversation. I know a lot of people are pretty much curious about partnerships or want to know about how they can actually build successful partnership and collaboration. So I guess my questions for all of you is that as organization or individual are thinking about solution, infrastructure, and partnership, the term collaboration has pretty much taken center stage. So in what ways do you view collaboration? So let's start with Basma.
Thank you so much for this conversation and for bringing us together, Alexandria. I think for me, collaboration must include transformational solidarity. In order for us to collaborate well, we must continually be inviting directly impacted people. And I'm speaking as an impacted people from the refugees and immigrants community. We want to make sure that communities who are impacted in the work are invited to these spaces where decisions and change are happening, and making room for their critique, guidance, and leadership, because we cannot just invite folks into talk about their trauma and not make any meaningful changes to the way organizational spaces are set up for the work. And the conversation must be centered around the people who are mostly affected by the systems of oppression, and shift the power to the ones who are directly impacted. Not only is the meaningful for those communities as it allows them to respond based on their own stories and experiences, but it also creates an opportunity for us as leaders to learn and sharpen our understanding and challenge our approaches. It's also allow us to work together and see perspective we may not be aware of, and to leverage the potential of everyone in the organization. And I'm speaking on that because I have seen how programs and policies have been created and failed because the impacted people are not part of the conversation. So for me, collaboration is making sure that we are centering the impacted people in the solution that we are trying to create for them.
Thank you so much, Basma. How about you, Deborah? And then after that, Ollie.
I really appreciate Basma's comments and agree with them wholeheartely. I work primarily in the museum setting, and one of the real challenges of the idea of collaboration in museums is that there is a sort of overblown sense that museums have this kind of authoritative voice and know best about everything that they do. And of course, we know that's not true. Just building on those, the Basma's comments, that really one cannot make interesting, serious overtures to involve communities without hearing the needs, the concerns, the voices that come from those communities, and then making decisions about the kinds of programming that we're doing. So those deep connections that we're really looking for when we collaborate and when we partner with organizations, whether those are other museums or community groups or community activists or even small businesses, all of those things require us to really be listening before we make decisions about how we're going to make our next program or our next initiative.
Thank you so much, Deborah. And how about you, Ollie? What's your take about collaboration?
Yeah, so collaboration can totally be difficult sometimes. But for us here at the Hispanic Center, it's all about the intentionality behind collaboration. So when you are approaching the collaboration with a mindset to actually make a difference and actually make this collaboration sustainable and include longevity for both the programs and the staff involved, so that you can impact the community, that's what is really essential. So really making sure that we're not approaching it to just gain ideas or steal ideas, I should say, or to replicate each other's services, but to actually see where each other's strengths and weaknesses are, and to approach the collaboration to support one another and to really strengthen each other as organizations so that you can have a greater impact in the community. And then when your collaborative partner isn't doing so well, or when you yourselves aren't doing so well, that intentionality behind holding each other accountable and having those honest and open conversations is really essential as well to have that success within the community.
Thank you so much, Ollie. I think you brought up something pretty interesting in your answer, because you mentioned that it can be a complicated process. And you also mentioned the concept of intentionality. So I would say on that particular note, then, so what is that process of collaboration? Because I know, like you mentioned, the process of collaboration can be complicated. It can even be messy and even time consuming. So how do you individually, whether as an individual person or maybe with the institution that you're working on or you're serving, how do you collaborate? So what is that process look like? We can start again with you, Holly, and then from there we will go with Deborah and then Basma.
Yeah, so for us, we try to start the process collaborating with those honest conversations, really trying to think holistically and thoroughly through the entire process, and have a thorough planning process to really make sure that we can figure out all the different steps or what is needed in the collaboration before we come to actually starting the collaboration. And of course, like, collaboration it needs to ebb and flow, right? It needs to be dynamic, and you need to make adjustments as you go along, but really trying to be to include that intentional piece so that you're including, like if you're applying for a grant together, what does that look like? Making sure that it is fair across the board so that everyone is getting a piece of the puzzle, a piece of the funding, so that it is fair and everyone's being paid fairly for their time. Making sure that agreements are fully fleshed out so you know exactly what your role is in the collaboration and what numbers you need to get, or what essentially is the intention or the goal behind the collaboration as well. So we always like to approach it with, like I mentioned before, understanding each other's weaknesses and strengths, making sure that, as Basma also mentioned, that you're bringing the community into the conversation so that it is something that they do actually need and do actually desire. So that you're not wasting their time or your time with the focus.
Thank you, Deborah.
That's great, Holly. I would start also with this idea of setting forth very clear goals. So, once you have a partner that you're pretty convinced that you want to partner to do a project or collaborate with, that it's absolutely essential that there are shared goals. And sometimes that's very easy and, everybody sort of agrees. But if there are a lot of people involved, it's extremely helpful, I find, to write down those goals, to check in on those goals periodically. Have we all made a decision to kind of shift our focus? Or did somebody make a decision to shift focus and neglected to tell everybody else who's part of the team? Those things can be really problematic. So that's partly about communication and really good, clear communication. And it's also about transparency. It is almost inevitable, I think, in a collaboration that an organization, has some kind of glitch, right? That a staff person leaves, or something that was supposed to happen at X time doesn't happen till 2 months later. And those things can really get in the way, and they can be misunderstood, and they can lead to distrust. So I think that kind of constant communication and transparency is, those are the sort of key things that I would put into the mix.
How about you, Basma?
Yes, so I come from the immigrants' rights movement. So for us, it's always about the community members and how we work with them in coalition setting. And I come from different backgrounds that include engineering and teaching. And I found that every set of nonprofits or government, all of these setting works really differently when it comes to collaboration and the process around collaboration. But I did choose something that I want to share today because it did require research, and the refugees and immigrants community always looked at we need to share testimonies for this research. We need to be part of the survey, to share feedback, to share interest. But one of the projects that I was coordinating, it did require a specific type of work, which is called co-designing. And that's what I want to share as an example for people to maybe understand the co-design work and research about it. There is a lot of research done around it. But the co-design process is the approach to designing policy, product, or even programs by actively involving all stakeholders, employees, partners, customers, citizen members, and in the process to ensure that results meet their needs and is usable. And it's an approach that focuses on processes and procedures, as well as feedback and input from people directly impacted by the decision being made. With this in mind, when it comes to the collaboration, I want to make sure that those who will be affected the most are able to contribute throughout the project design, not just in the end, through the process. And the current project that we are working in our organization is involves surveys, focus groups. We know that some communities maybe not trusting the surveys or even responding in a phone call, but they could be more comfortable in speaking in a community setting where there is no barrier to language and accent. So what we could do to make sure that there is no barriers for community participation, to make sure that they are meaningfully participating in any project. And I'm happy to share with anyone in the call and even after the call what it take for the co-design process to be successful, as we have done a couple of reports and it was really successful process.
Thank you so much, Basma, for this and also bringing up the co-design process. I think it's very helpful, especially for people to think about, okay, if I never done it before, or I'm thinking about doing it, or maybe I have a new project or there is a grant that I'm thinking about applying to, and I want to bring a new partner, that also can be like a framework that they probably may want to consider. So on that end, one thing I wanted to do is I kind of like wanted to bring it back to Deborah, because I know you work, because you mentioned in the museum settings that you always say, as you mentioned earlier, you said that usually museums are seen as this particular group that pretty much provide like knowledge and so on, and the authority per se, but sometimes we museums sometimes don't always get it right. So I wanted to pretty much learn a little bit more about your work in museum and what role, for instance, like in creating partnerships with communities, what role can museum even can play? Because you mentioned they don't get it right, but what can it be? What can it look like? I will say.
So in my work, I've collaborated with so many different kinds of organizations, and I think I'll, just let me say a few words about the possibilities there, because in addition to this idea of working with individuals within a community, which I'll say a little bit more about in a second, I've, for instance, worked with other museums, the Weeksville Heritage Center, which is a historical site in Brooklyn. And I worked with that organization, Brooklyn Historical Society, and an organization called the Irondale Theater Ensemble. And we worked together on a project about the history of abolition in Brooklyn. And it was a big project and involved producing exhibitions and theater pieces and even a monument to abolition in Brooklyn. So very ambitious, walking tours all over the city. And it was a project that needed people to be both working separately from one another and also working together. And we would often find ourselves really a little bit out of sync until we sat down together and really rolled up our sleeves and made sure that everybody was working closely together. Alternatively, I worked with a for-profit organization called the Brooklyn Navy Yard, where most of this organization is busy doing commercial work, but they also wanted an educational component. And they actually approached the Brooklyn Historical Society and said, we would like to work with you to create an exhibition about the history of the Navy Yard and to do programs for high school students. And that was a completely different culture than I am used to working in. Those are people who are always looking at the bottom line and at budgets, but they knew that they wanted to bring in the museum's expertise. And there again, it was about getting used to each other's language, about understanding what the goals were that might diverge, but where there was a real mutual interest in creating something for people all through the borough of Brooklyn. And then the last kind of type of collaboration and partnership that I wanted to mention was really with a grassroots community. And that is an oral history project that we did at Brooklyn Historical Society with the Muslim communities of Brooklyn. And that was a project where we had to reach out to individuals. There is not one monolithic Muslim community in Brooklyn. There are many, many communities with people speaking many different languages, from the African-American Muslim community to communities coming from throughout the Middle East. And that was about communities of people who had never really had any reason to trust the Brooklyn Historical Society. They were literally sort of invisible in the context of our institution. And here we were approaching them and saying, we would like to help you tell your stories, capture your stories for yourselves, and to try to have those stories be meaningfully known by all of the communities of Brooklyn and saved and kept for historical purposes as well as for current purposes. And building the trust in that kind of context was a very long process, not something that happened overnight, and involved our making a commitment that was very, very long term. So this was not something that we were doing over the course of a year. It was something we were doing over years and years. And we had one staff member, a man named Zahir Ali, who was on our staff, who was a historian and of the Muslim community, who really dedicated himself to making these connections and building up this amazing set of stories that became kind of the fabric of our relationship with a whole host of individuals that was really very thrilling and quite transformative, not just for the people who were telling their stories and had never been asked to tell their stories before, but it was transformative to the Brooklyn Historical Society as well. Knowing now that we actually could kind of hold our heads up high in the Muslim communities of Brooklyn and say, we are about your stories. We care about your stories. So that's sort of some of the range of experiences I've had, and they're very different from one another, but they do all have this kind of through line of being committed over time and of really sort of understanding that authenticity is key to making those collaborations really work.
Thank you so much for sharing this and also talking about sort of like those particular partnerships and the different groups that you're able to collaborate with. So I guess my follow-up questions for you, I think, and before I turn it over to, I would say Holly and then after Basma. So a quick answer. So what was one of the good practice? Because working with different groups, because even Basma mentioned, everybody is different. Everybody works differently because you said nonprofit, for-profit, everybody has their ways and they also have different sets of goals and their values also tend to change. So along working with all of this particular group, has been one practice or the best practice that you use to work and navigate the needs of each group, I will say. Deborah.
Well, one is a little hard for me, but I will start with something that to many people is very obvious, and I'm embarrassed to tell you that in my adult life, it took me a very long time to learn. So that's part of why I share it first, and that is, if we all agree that trust is an essential part to good collaboration, then for me, the notion of breaking bread with your collaborators is one of the things that I have learned that makes a huge difference. And I mean that quite literally, sitting down with people, sharing a meal, learning about people personally, so that your collaboration is kind of got an under a safety net that is about very real human sharing and kindness and thoughtfulness. And that has, I have found, made a very significant difference in then, really being able to reflect when a partnership is in trouble, when you hit stormy waters. It means that you have people you can go to and say, let's try to talk this through. Let's try to assess what we can do to right the ship and get back on track or whatever it is. So I probably have other things to add, but I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for this. And now we'll turn it over to you, Ollie, because I know a lot of time, and I mean, we may have a lot of people on the call who are interested to connect with multilingual audiences, right? And that's also something a lot of people may want to do. Maybe we may want to offer multilingual, I would say, programming and so on, and they don't know how to do it. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to start. So I think what we're gonna start is to tell us a little bit more about your organization. So for us to kind of like familiarize ourselves a little bit with your organization, and then knowing the connecting with a specific audience that come with many challenges and complexities, because even like the Latinx population is very broad, so there is not one Latinx population. So how are you working with Latinx communities to provide language access, Holly?
Yes, hi. So I am representing the Hispanic Center of Western Michigan. And so we are located in Grand Rapids, Michigan, on the west coast of Michigan. We have been in the community for over 40 years now. Actually, next year will be our 45th year, which is really exciting. Our focus is really empowering the Hispanic community to achieve equity, self-sufficiency, and personalized prosperity. That's our mission. That's what really keeps us focused on approaching each situation with our clients in a holistic lens to make sure we're breaking down any barriers that they are experiencing, regardless if that's what they're coming in to see us for. So we provide, the majority of our services are direct services to our clients. We do focus on the Hispanic community, but we do not turn anyone away. So we do provide over 200 languages in language services via over the phone and VRI interpretation, and then over 80 in written translation as well. But we, in the Hispanic Center, so language services, the department that one of the departments I represent is just one of the departments, one of the amazing departments that we have here. Some of the others are workforce development, youth and education, and family support services. So as I mentioned, we provide those direct services. So really trying to break down the barriers, approaching each client with, okay, this is the service that you're coming in for, but how can we look at your entire family and think about that self-sufficiency or that personalized prosperity for the entire family? And so do we need to refer you over to our youth program services? Do you need transportation? Do you need housing? Do you need all this other additional services? And so in the language services department, as I mentioned, we focus on that spoken interpretation. We also provide signed interpretation as well as needed. And then that written translation, and then the training for new and established interpreters. And so I do oversee workforce development as well. And so we focus on unemployment services, career exploration, job application assistance, resume building, interview practice, digital literacy. So making sure that our community understands and can interact with different technology in a successful way, both for their personal lives, but also for the professional lives. We provide some training, so GED in Spanish for those who might have trouble transferring their credits from other countries or who did not complete high school here in the States. And then also financial coaching to make sure that, okay, we were able to secure you a great job, but how can you have longevity there? How can you manage your finances as well? How can you actually start building some savings accounts to have longevity and success for your family? And so some of those are some of the services that we offer and some of the areas of focus. And so connecting with and working with the Latinx communities, as you mentioned, Alexandra, even the Hispanic community is very diverse and very complex within itself. And so as we approach it through just language services, for example, making sure that I think it was actually before the conversation, sorry, I'm referring back to making sure that we're utilizing people within the community and we're building them as interpreters and translators so that they can have that familiarization of the community, of the localization that is needed and the transcription that is needed within the translation and interpretation process, so that they not only can provide accurate communication and direct communication, but they can also be a success story within the community as we are providing that income and that financial sustainability for them. And so we approach language services on a corporate level, so working with organizations and companies throughout the country, actually. So providing those virtual services where needed, and then those local services, on-site interpretation where we can. And then also we do reduce that or provide free services when needed to our community members as individuals. And so a lot of our community, and this is actually how the Language Services Department started within the Hispanic community, or was in this Hispanic Center, is our community needed their birth certificates translated, their transcripts translated. They needed dentist appointment covered by an interpreter. And so we still offer those individual services at a reduced cost. And then we do try to also establish ESL classes, not only just in basic English and grammar for communication, both written and spoken and reading, but also focused on different industries or different professions, so that it can be really hyper focused on, okay, you're going for a welding class, then you need this terminology to be successful for your future. And then also on the opposite side, providing Spanish classes for companies, for their staff, so that they can even be that much more welcoming to both their Hispanic, Spanish speaking staff members, but also their clients as well. And so really having that intentionality behind that approach.
Thank you so much. And so you've definitely brought up something pretty important in terms of language access. And I think this is definitely an equity issue, even though sometimes it's not seen as an equity issue. So when it comes to reaching out to multilingual audiences, right? I think this actually became something that became very acute during the pandemic. However, many organizations, because you mentioned you work with companies or organizations, they may not have a budget line specifically catered to language access, or they may not be unwilling to pay for it, because I don't think the cost makes sense, because sometimes people think Google Translate might work. What should organizations consider when working with or including multilingual audiences, right? So for people who may want to start, or maybe who actually are already starting, I will say quickly before we turn it over to Basma.
Yes, so I will try to go through this quickly. So I know I sound like a broken record in this conversation, but it really depends on how intentional you're trying to be, right? So a lot of companies that we work with for workforce development and language services say that they want, or that they need, warm bodies, as they try to say it. And they don't care if they're primarily Spanish speaking, they just need workers, right? But they're not being intentional behind that language accessibility to welcome those workers, to welcome them into their employment, to provide them success and longevity within their company. And so we have really tried to be a lot more in the advocacy piece and be a lot more bold when we're having these conversations with employers, with other organizations who say that they do want to work with the Hispanic community or other communities, but they're not willing to sit down and really look at their budget. However, we as an organization, we're always open to sitting down, to producing quotes, for looking at to really going through the assessment process of what material does need to be translated, what different conversations need to be interpreted. How can we start assisting you in finding bilingual workers so that you don't always need that interpretation service, so that it's already built into your company and your organization. We were really fortunate through the pandemic, where we were able to find funding to be able to provide some of our services for free. And so we actually provided around 40 organizations for 19 languages for $80,000 in free translations and interpretations. And so we are always, our focus is language accessibility on equity as well. And so we are always willing to go the extra mile to sit down with you, to search for funding, to search for grants, to apply for them together, to look at your budget and help you be able to establish that, so you can provide that intentional language accessibility to the community.
Thank you so much, Holly, and I will turn it over to Basma. So Basma, I guess my questions for you is, can you talk to me a little bit more about your organization role and also your responsibilities? Then from there, we probably will delve into the challenges and complexity that comes with connecting with a specific audience. And then can you kind of like tell us a little bit more about your experience of reaching out to refugee communities, especially Reefdales, I'm sorry.
Yes, for sure. I think it's a couple of questions. I'm trying to organize my thought on how it starts. I can share a little bit first about my work. I do hold national position and local position. My national position is the National Campaign Director for a campaign called We Are All America, which we works to uphold and strengthen our nation commitments to welcome and protect those seeking freedom, safety, and refuge in the United States. And we organize refugees all over the country to build inclusive communities where we all belong. And I am also the founder of an executive director of Reefdales, it's a nonprofit based in Jacksonville, Florida, that aims to amplify the voices of refugees and immigrants and advance inclusion and belonging efforts in public spaces. In the last 3 years since we founded Reefdales, we actually became a leader in community building across Northeast Florida and the US. Reefdales fills a critical needs in both immigrants and non-immigrant spaces in 2 ways. One, we provide professional development opportunities for immigrants to give them the necessary skills and confidence to share their stories and lived experience. And the second part, we educate communities on the varied immigrants' experience and highlight the value of potential of including immigrants' voices in collaborative spaces. We are actually working now on a really unique project, and it's pretty much have been a response to the many requests from community partners, corporations, organizations in Florida that shares the need of having refugees, that they want to hire refugees and immigrants, but they have been struggling with the recruitments to helping refugees and immigrants to thrive in workforce development spaces. And our current project focus on the workforce development. It's called We Well to Lead Well, as we have started to, as an organization that focuses on a storytelling, and now we are actually shifting to make the stories weaved well within the community so we could lead well together as an organizational and leadership development program. This program will focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging practices, and offers full services approach to collaboration in workplace for contributing voices. I don't know if we have space, but I'm going to use also the time to explain where I come and how I am working with the community. So I have shared in the beginning that I am actually a forcibly displaced person myself, and I moved to Florida back in 2010 as a refugee. I faced many challenges in my migration journey that are similar to the experiences of other refugees and immigrants. I tried finding solution to my own integration, and that actually led me to fully change my career and switch it, as I realized that the needs to changing negative perception about the refugee experience and shifting power to refugees like me who came to the US with a depth of talent and leadership capability, who can participate in creating meaningful solution to resettlement, integration, and community building. So back to the questions, since I come from the refugee community, I know how to work and collaborate well with this specific community. The main challenges actually we have been facing are existing narrative that paint the identity of refugees as forever victims, but never equal partners. And creating programs through Reefdales and through We Are All America, it's pretty much to invest in refugees leaders and their development. So we are able to shift that culture and narrative little by little. It's important that we all consider ways to ensure refugees and immigrants are equipped within the tools they need so they can be seen and treated as equal partners in this collaboration. And when we reach to that point, then we will be actually able to collaborate together, and no one will have barriers of participation in policy and conversation like these.
Thank you so much. I think throughout your answer, that's something that you really talk about, like the challenges that you actually face. So can you pretty much talk about sort of like the challenge that you actually have to face, especially as someone, I would say, leading an organization and also trying to challenge the narrative, because other time challenging the narrative may be, you may get partners that are willing to change the narratives with you, and you also may get partners that are willing to only stick to the stereotypes, right? And navigating that. And also, what other lesson have you learned, maybe that have maybe led to policies or things that you have learned along the way that may have changed your practices, or that you pretty much now take on or you consider whenever you want to partner or work with different groups of people, I would say partners or funders and so on. Basma.
Yes, so I think for the question about practices, I think if we are willing to work with the specific communities, we just need to understand all of the barriers and find a way to make everything accessible for the community to participate fully. And instead of looking at the community as incapable community, looking at what kind of barriers we can take away to make sure that that community fully engage in the process. The other thing is, as nonprofits, communicating that with funders and educating funders that some of the practices that they are used to work with, it's not necessarily right. And actually, Alexander, we talked about it before the call. We need to educate always the funders about how meaningful our work and how the process takes time. These kind of process, when we want to make sure that there is no barrier for a specific community, process are set. It does take not 1 year, it takes a year of building the trust with the communities so the work could be meaningfully really happening. So educating funders, educating community partners about what it takes. Sometimes, I think I shared it with you before, sometimes I know that some partners are tokenizing me and my work, and just because they want to check the box of, hey, we have now an organization that's led by refugees is partner. But sometimes I do it because I know I can enter that space, so I can little by little change these narratives and pave the way for other organizations so they don't need to go through that. So how I could, it's my responsibility, since now I am in any space, is to educate these partners with good intention that this is the way that the work should be happening, and this is the only way it should be happening. I think the other thing when we talk about policy change, historically, international policymakers have never, or I will not say never, but not sufficiently engaged refugees and asylum on other forcibly displaced people in designing policies, global policies and programs that direct impact us. Forcibly displaced people have faced barriers for accessing training on refugee policy and advocacy, and frequently encounter misconception about the many contribution we make to local, state, and global communities. But I am actually pleased to see movement towards systematic change and how the US actually government is adapting to our request of having a refugee become part of the global conversation. This year, I was really honored to join the US Refugee Advisory Board, the first US Refugee Advisory Board, which affirms that to join a global conversation with the US government in Geneva and to engage meaningfully in conversation that impact refugees globally. With these kind of conversation, we were not able to change a while ago. But I think even for the immigrants' rights movement, and I have shared it in different spaces with funders and with partners, that the Black Lives Matter movement have impacted many movements and have impacted the DEI conversation and shifted really well. And for me, I do really always thankful for the Black Lives movement to really pave the way for many other minorities community to open the dialogue of the importance of seeing who's missing in the room and how impacted people need to be in all of the spaces. I don't know, hopefully that could answer your question, but there are some really great future that we are seeing now, and hopefully that we always ask who's missing in the room and how we could make sure that there is no barriers for community to be part of any room.
Thank you so much, Basma. I think we do have some time for questions. So
Alexandra, could I just add one thing to what Basma just was talking about, just really quickly?
Yes, Debbie, that's the part.
Which is, I think there's also a role here for us thinking about our community spaces in interesting and creative ways. So where people become visible, where people engage in these conversations and in the work that needs to be done, whether you're talking about, activists working on refugee conditions, or whether you're talking about a community that there are so many interesting places where people can meet to discover those things, libraries, certainly museums, certainly, even sometimes in coffee shops, that it's very exciting, I think, for us to see the kind of intersection of all of this work that you brought together here in this conversation. And I think, the more creative we are about bringing people together in their communities, the better off our work will be.
Thank you so much for adding this, Deborah. So if you have any questions, so we do have time to get 1 or 2 questions very quickly. So if you have any questions, now is the time to add them. So you can there's 2 ways you can do so. You can either add it to the chat, or there is also a Q&A. So you can also add your question using the Q&A function as well. So if you have any questions, so now is the time to ask our panelists any questions or things that you maybe want us to expand on, or any other questions that came up during the conversation. I'm gonna give people some time and see if there's any other questions that comes up. Okay, so we do have questions in the chat. So for both Basma and Ollie touched on the importance of reciprocity in doing work with communities. So I'm wondering if either of you could speak to any challenge you experienced when trying to work from a space of reciprocity. What did you do? So that can be for either Ollie or Basma.
Yeah, I can go. So yes, so this is very, very usually an interesting conversation. This happens, unfortunately, I would say in the past, it's happened a lot more frequently than we would have liked. And it's taken a lot of honest conversations, a lot of terminating different collaborations or different relationships to really hone in on the point that we want to be intentional behind the work that we're doing. We're here for the Hispanic community. We are not here for any programming that any funders want to do. We really try to be very intentional and very hyper-focused in what we're doing. And so we have unfortunately had different relationships end or have different tension with different relationships who want to essentially reciprocate or model services that we are doing after what they're doing. I'm sorry, that was the opposite response. So essentially a lot of people trying to model their services off of what we are doing instead of having intentional collaboration. And so we just have to put boundaries up. So essentially making sure that we're having those honest conversations, that we're trying to keep other organizations accountable for what they're doing or who they're leaving out of the conversation. trying to end those relationships that just are not functioning, and really trying to be open and honest about why they're not functioning and how we would love to collaborate in the future. So really trying to approach each with accountability and honesty and openness.
Thank you so much, Ollie. And how about you, Basma? Very quickly, because we only have 5 minutes left.
I think really quickly, it does take a lot of innovation all of the time, how to make sure that you are always unique to the work you do. And I think, I mean, not in many spaces we have refugee leading organizations that is serviced for refugees. I feel like that's have been a really unique for the work that I am holding, and I am pushing it to have more of that. So more refugees leading in organizations that provide services for refugees. But for me, I always try to make sure that with partners, we work and our work needs to be aligned from the beginning. So if the work is not aligned, there is no way to collaborate. If the message is not aligned, if it's not the mission and vision is not aligned, there is no way for us to collaborate on things. So I think in all our work, we intentionally assess any collaboration before entering any collaboration, because in the end of the day, for us, the reputation of our work is more important than anything else. And our community, the community we serve, their trust in us is more important than anything else. So assessing any collaboration is really important before even starting in it, and building relationship even before any collaboration is really important, before even formally starting working with other members. So yeah, assessing, setting, making sure that boundaries from the beginning set, it's really important in this work.
Thank you so much, Basma. I think today's conversation, actually, we definitely delve into different themes. So I do think one of them, in terms of that, the collaboration itself, everybody may have their own definition of what collaboration means to them. But at the same time, the one thing that I think all of you pretty much mentioned is that the collaborative process actually takes time. So this is not something, I think, from what Deborah mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, is that it's not something that happened overnight. So that's something that takes time. And then in terms of the practices, in terms of people who are thinking about studying on new partnerships or collaboration or connecting with a new audience, so getting to know the group, reaching out to them, and even and also maybe meeting them for a meal and having those particular kind of conversation. It can be over the phone or something, having those particular kind of conversation. And I think both of you and Basma and Ollie mentioned being intentional in that particular process, and also always making sure that we are not leaving any other voices behind. So making sure who's in the room, and also creating spaces for those in the room. So it's not about really checking a box in a way. So it's also making sure that this is something that the community itself needs, and also that pretty much tackle their wholeness, I would say, in a way, instead of using, like, thinking about it from a stereotype point of view. Like, pretty much there's a lot of combating narratives as well. So especially if you're thinking about working with specific audiences, being mindful of that. I think these are the things that I would say that a lot of the audience members probably took away from with today's conversation. So like all of you mentioned, it's a long process, it takes time. So these are the things that we can actually be mindful of. And also, you also mentioned one of the key things is also about the education process, educating people about that particular process, educating donors, educating funders, and also our partners as well about those different experiences, because there are so many, every community have so many needs, but they also, like, there is not one set community. There's so many layers that are attached to it. So on that note, I really think all of you for joining the conversation. And what I will do is I will turn it over to Ashanti to see if she is done with today's capturing today's convo, and if she would like to share, or if not, one thing we can always do, we can always share it after the event. So Ashanti, do you have anything as of yet that you would like to share with the audience, especially in terms of capturing today's conversation?
It looks like I'm having some issues. I don't want to keep you guys.
No worries. So what
certainly.
we'll do is we will share with you the snapshot of the of Ashanti's graphic. So that's one thing that we're actually gonna do, especially during our thank you notes. And also if Basma, Ollie, and Deborah has any other resources, we also will share that along with that as well. On that note, I thank all of you for joining today's conversation. We do have a next session, which will be on Thursday, December 1st at 4 p.m., which will be around decolonization. So if you can join, feel free to join. We have listed this information in the chat. So on Arnold, we thank you for joining. I think we can see your screen, Ashanti. And this is what we have.
Yeah, here it is. Just a quick glance.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Yes, so that's what we have in terms of today's conversation. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.